Dear participants of the International Conference on Traditional Building, Architecture and Urbanism, my name is Stepan Liphart and I am founder of the Liphart Architects practice. Our bureau is based in Saint Petersburg, the former capital of pre-revolutionary Russia. We develop architectural concepts for residential buildings, mainly in the Neoclassical style. For the latest issue of the Journal of Traditional Building, Architecture and Urbanism, we described 3 of our residential projects created for Russian cities, Kaluga and Saint Petersburg. Each design has been made with reference to the architecture of the historical city, and in this presentation, I am delighted to talk in more detail about each project. The first project we consider worth presenting is a small apartment building in the provincial Russian city of Kaluga, 200 kilometers from Moscow. Our design was created for a closed competition held at the end of 2021. The task was to create a compact, low-rise residential building in the premium segment located in the city center. The plan of historic Kaluga was formed mainly at the end of the 18th century and the period of Russian classicism, and is characterized by regularity and orderliness. A large part of the city is made up of low-rise individual residential buildings, partly wooden. It is such multi-temporal and diverse small-scale development that forms the setting of this project. There are 2 landmarks in the vicinity. First, the city garden, where the Russian thinker and visionary Konstantin Tsiolkovsky is buried. The second is the State Museum of the History of Cosmonautics, a high point of Soviet modernist architecture. The project site has a corner location at the quarter and faces 2 streets without heavy traffic. The house's L-shaped 3-story volume includes a courtyard open toward the garden, separated from the urban space by a transparent fence. This volume is divided into several parts and resembles a conglomerate of low-rise mansions. The height restrictions, with a site limit of 10 meters, affected the design. As the assignment was for premium housing of 3 stories, we proposed lowering the first floor and courtyard levels by 715 centimeters relative to ground level. All the apartments on the first floors were designed as 2-story, some with separate entrances. The windows and doors to the courtyard are on a level in proportion to the yard. And on the street side, we proposed landscaped balcony terraces to show the private space from the urban environment and offset the effect of the lowered ground floor. The first floor apartments are planned in such a way that the ground floor combines communal spaces, lobbies and kitchen living rooms, while the mezzanine floor contains more domestic accommodations, mainly bedrooms. We paid great attention to the entrance, as the house consists of 2 residential sections with a single entrance, and to offset the compact nature of the building and its spaces due to the project constraints, we suggested using the full height of the structure for the entrance lobby. The volume is cut through a solemn, slender space, illuminated through 2 high portals facing the street and the courtyard. For this space, we proposed interior solutions outside the competition program, combining elements of late 17th century Russian Baroque with Art Deco motifs. This was a visually dynamic version of Art Deco, close to streamline, allowing us to create a unified image of volumes and spaces flowing into each other. Bay windows, balconies, terraces, window compositions, etc. These dynamics are also correlated with the local theme of outer space and space technology. The slender proportions of the windows and doors and the widely applied golden ratio are intended to give monumentality to the low extended volume. A number of planning and volumetric spatial ideas are taken from the structure and principles of the classical property mentioned above, a city-state of 19th century aristocrats. A synthesis of the style with Art Deco decorative features forms the aesthetic basis of our design. The next two projects are residential buildings for central Saint Petersburg, for the historic district on Vasilyevsky Island in the Neva River Delta. The urban layout is a regular grid dating from the early 18th century. The island was supposed to be subdivided by 30 canals intersected by 3 perpendicular avenues. But by the mid-18th century, the canal scheme was abandoned and the canals already built morphed into city streets, known as lines, referred to by numbers. The first project built here is called La Petite France, located on Vasilyevsky Island's 20th line, composed mainly of 4 or 5-story buildings erected in the late 19th or early 20th centuries, typical of European cities of the time. The project was carried out in 2016-2018, with the building to be completed in early 2023. Its structure is almost entirely based on the principles of St. Petersburg development in the late 19th or early 20th centuries, also influenced by high-rise and planning regulations. 2 symmetrical 5-story wings overlook the street development line, and the number of stories increases deeper into the block, where there is a rectangular cordon separated from the street by an open-work fence. The inner spaces contain smaller, partitioned courtyards. The building's architecture is based mainly around 2 aspects: the straight line of the frontage and the front yard space. As in the Kaluga project, the first floors of La Petite France are residential. The apartments are 2-story with separate entrances. In the courtyards, the apartments have small front gardens. On the street side, there are entrance niches, creating a kind of buffer between the city and the private space. The building has 4 sections, 2 entered from the street, punctuated by small porticos, and the main front entrance for the courtyard sections is located in the cordon. This entrance is accentuated by a monumental portal with a decorative panel. The stylistic prototype is also Art Deco, but in developing the facade solutions, we also considered the history of St. Petersburg architecture, combining 3 sources. First, we drew upon the German classicism brought to the St. Petersburg tradition by Leo von Klenze in the middle of 19th century. Second was the geometrized Northern Art Nouveau. Third was the Leningrad architecture of the 1930s, linked to the European neoclassicism of the time, primarily with Italian prototypes. In scale and character, the composition is based on a combination of 3 orders of models. The scale of the courtyard is more monumental, closer to the Italian Leningrad style, while the street side is closer to the small-scale style of the late 19th century. Additional facade complexity and ornamentation is provided by geometric pilasters and friezes, interpreting the crystal and sunburst motifs of Art Deco. The facades are covered with glass fiber reinforced concrete of different textures, imitating limestones and grey gabbro granite. The courtyard facades are rendered with painted plaster. Finally, our latest project is a residential building on the 12th line of Vasilyevsky Island, named INTBAU. It was designed in 2018 with construction scheduled for 2024. The site is in many ways similar to that of La Petite France, a landscaped residential street with medium-rise buildings. The architecture of both projects is similar, and in fact, this one continues and develops the ideas of its predecessor. Typologically, INTBAU is somewhat more complex. It includes a hotel as well as a historic building, a two-story wooden house built in the mid-19th century. The open courtyard is formed by a U-shaped volume of 5 or 6-story buildings, partially separated from the street by a wooden mansion. In formulating the design, we interpreted the main courtyard space not as regular, but as a picturesque and plastic. As a prototype, we may cite the square of a European city of the medieval period. Indeed, the urban fabric of the time was formed largely spontaneously, based on convenience and individual needs. Squares became a receptacle for urban life, commercial, spiritual, and administrative, a kind of nucleus or cell from which the traditional town was formed. A private courtyard in a European city was the antithesis of a public square, but at the same time its likeness, a reservoir of urban life. Thus, the framing of nuclei within private residential buildings of 2, 3, or 4 floors formed a sort of shell or walls of an open-air room. With their scale and complexity, such spaces were human and readily perceivable. Setting out from this notion, we form the INTBAU structure as a complex shell around the living space. The complex lines of the building's contours divide the volume into an assembly of slender individual facades. In order to avoid chaos, the composition is based on a series of related modules, emphasized by ornamented panels. As in La Petite France, the first-floor apartments are designed with 2 stories. The 5th floor on the street side is designed as a mansard with dormers and wide terraces. The walls finished with plaster and ornamentation executed with the sgraffito technique. The mission of our bureau is to spread the aesthetic of classical city across the globe, and it is why we are open to the communication and partnership in Europe and all around the world. Thank you for your attention, and we will be honored to get the feedback from you. If you have some questions, don't hesitate to contact us as well.